Why Venice hasn't collapsed yet. The
Then we
hidden
build a
structures
new one
below.
here,
There was a
between the
time when this
sky
place looked
and the
nothing like a
water.
city. Just water, mud, and silence stretching to
Drive
the edge of the
piles
known
deeper.
world. A shimmering
must
wasteland
secure
of
the
shifting tides and
foundations before the
sinking
tide
sand where the
returns.
horizon felt fragile and the wind carved the sky with blades of salt. No empire, no architect, no dreamer would have pointed here and said, yes, this is where a great city should rise. Yet this is where it happened. Not because of ambition, not because of glory, but because people were running out of places to hide. In the collapsing twilight of the Western Roman Empire, violence spread across the mainland like a storm without mercy. Villages burned, roads emptied, armies marched, and as fear swallowed the countryside, families fled toward the only refuge left to them, the water. They stepped into the lagoon the way a drowning man reaches for air, hoping its labyrinth of reeds and sandbanks might protect them from the chaos behind. They did not see a future here, only shelter, only a pause between danger and survival. But from this desperate beginning, something impossible began to grow. Small wooden huts rose on trembling stilts. Boats drifted between patches of dry land. Fires burned in the mist. And slowly, among the mud and the tides, the outline of a community appeared. A city on water. A dream built where no dream should stand. How did they do it? How did a handful of refugees take mud, fear, and salt and transform them into one of the most astonishing cities in human history? This is the story of how the impossible was built. The people who reached the lagoon did not come as settlers. They arrived as fugitives, carrying nothing but fear, hunger, and the memories of a world collapsing behind them. The 5th century had torn Italy apart. Visigoths thundered through cities like Padua. Huns swept across plains with terrifying speed. Lombards descended from the north, burning what they could not take. To ordinary families, the mainland was no longer a homeland. It was a battlefield. So, they moved quietly at first, then in waves toward the strange, shimmering emptiness of the water. It was a place outsiders feared. A maze of shifting shallows where even experienced sailors hesitated. But for those fleeing the violence, that danger was a blessing. If seasoned warriors avoided these waters, then invaders on horseback would never dare pursue them here. They chose the lagoon not because it was safe, but because everything else was deadly. Families built their first shelters out of necessity, not vision. Rough wooden huts balanced on uneven stilts. Platforms of planks laid over clusters of reeds. Fires fed by driftwood struggled against the wind. Children slept above water that rose and fell beneath their feet. At high tide, the foundations trembled as if reminding them they did not belong here. But day after day, the refugees adapted. They learned the rhythms of the tide. They memorized the hidden shallows. They formed alliances, shared food, and built rafts to connect one fragile refuge to another. And something changed. What began as a scattered collection of huts slowly became a settlement. What began as temporary escape grew roots. A village appeared on the waves, then another, then another. The lagoon, once feared, had become a sanctuary, and the people who survived upon it were beginning to imagine what might come next. To build a city on water, they first had to solve a problem no civilization had ever dared to confront. How do you anchor permanence to something that never stays still? The lagoon shifted with every tide. The soil beneath it was not firm ground but a soup of mud, clay, and salt. Yet this unstable world would become the foundation of Venice. The Venetians began by studying the lagoon the way others studied stars or scriptures. They watched where the earth held firm beneath the surface, where the silt settled, where the mud swallowed anything that dared rest upon it. They discovered pockets of compacted clay deep below the shifting layers. If they could reach those pockets, they could create a platform, a hidden skeleton strong enough to carry a city. They chose wood as their weapon, not just any wood, but trunks of alder, elm, and especially the dense, water-resistant hornbeam. These trees, once cut and stripped, became long, smooth piles. Each pile was driven deep into the mud with rhythmic blows from teams of workers using wooden mallets and weighted drop hammers. Dozens of piles formed a cluster. Hundreds of clusters formed a platform, and thousands of platforms spread beneath future neighborhoods. In time, more than 1 million piles would stand under Venice, an invisible forest planted upside down beneath the waves. What made this system miraculous was not just the quantity of wood, but the science hidden within it. Submerged in mud without oxygen, the wood did not rot. It petrified. Mineral-rich water flowed through the fibers, hardening them until they behaved more like stone than timber. Each pile carried vertical loads, while the friction between densely packed piles provided lateral stability. Together, they transformed unstable mud into a rigid, load-bearing platform capable of supporting entire districts. It was engineering born from observation rather than theory, a craft refined through repetition and necessity over generations. Above this forest of buried timber, they laid thick horizontal beams locked together like the ribs of a ship. On top of these, they placed massive blocks of Istrian stone, a pale, almost marble-like limestone quarried across the Adriatic. This stone resisted salt, absorbed little water, and provided a stable surface on which true construction could finally begin. Slowly, foundations emerged where there had been only water. Platforms became courtyards, courtyards became streets, and one by one, houses rose above the tides, their weight spread across thousands of pillars hidden below. Venice was no longer a refuge of fear. It was becoming a city. As the settlement grew, a new challenge emerged, one just as difficult as building on water. How do you connect dozens of tiny islands scattered across a restless lagoon? In most cities, streets and squares formed naturally. But in Venice, water carved every path. The early Venetians solved this the only way they could, with boats. They rowed from doorway to doorway, from workshop to garden, from one family to another. The lagoon was their street, and the oar was their lifeline. But a city cannot thrive if every step depends on a boat. Markets needed stable pathways. Traders needed reliable routes. Families needed simple access to their neighbors. And so, almost reluctantly, Venice began to test another impossible idea: bridges. The first bridges were humble wooden walkways, narrow, uneven, and often temporary. Some could be raised like drawbridges. Others were just planks resting on barrels or short piles. They creaked with every step and shifted with the tide. Yet they worked. Slowly, canals that once divided neighborhoods now linked them. The most ambitious crossing was the one over the Grand Canal, the wide, sinuous artery cutting through the heart of the growing city. At first, the crossing wasn't a bridge at all, but a floating pontoon of boats tied side by side, with planks laid across them. This floating bridge swayed with the water, groaned under weight, and had to be rebuilt constantly. But it became essential, and the city grew around it. Eventually, a wooden bridge replaced it, a bold, arched structure that soared over the canal. It was beautiful, useful, and fragile. It burned during riots. It collapsed under crowds. Storms tore at its beams. Again and again, the bridge died, and again the Venetians resurrected it. This resilience forged the legend of the Rialto, the bridge that refused to disappear. And soon, Venice would dare to rebuild it one final time, not in wood, but in stone. Before Venice became a republic, before its nobles wore silk and its merchants ruled the sea, the city needed a center, a place where identity could take root. But in the beginning, there was nothing grand at all. The area that would one day become the famous Piazza San Marco was little more than a patchwork of vegetable gardens, wooden huts, animal pens, and an uneven dirt field cut in half by a shallow canal. It was a village space, not a symbol of power. Yet even in this humble state, the Venetians sensed the importance of gathering spaces. People met here to trade fish, discuss tides, settle disputes, and prepare for the difficult days ahead. This was not yet a piazza, it was a heartbeat. Faint, but steady. Everything changed when the relics of St. Mark arrived in Venice. The event transformed the identity of the lagoon settlement almost overnight. To honor the relics, the city decided to reshape its chaotic center. The canal crossing the open field was filled in. Wooden houses were demolished. The ground was leveled. Slowly, order replaced disorder, and intention replaced improvisation. A simple chapel rose first, modest in size, but monumental in meaning. Over centuries, it would grow into the golden Basilica of San Marco, a masterpiece of domes, mosaics, and Byzantine splendor. Next to it, a watchtower of wood appeared, used to scan the lagoon for ships and danger. This early tower would later evolve into the towering Campanile di San Marco, the iconic sentinel of the city. Though primitive at first, this newly formed space became the nucleus of Venetian authority. It was here that the city began to see itself not just as a refuge, but as a rising power with a destiny far beyond the lagoon. As Venice took shape, something extraordinary began to happen. What had once been a desperate refuge slowly transformed into a crossroads of the world. The city's greatest weakness, being surrounded by water, became its greatest strength. Ships from the Adriatic passed naturally through the lagoon, and the Venetians, sharp-eyed and ambitious, seized the opportunity. By the 10th century, Venice was no longer hiding from the world. It was negotiating with it, trading with it, and soon, profiting from it. Its merchants mastered the rhythms of the sea, sailing to distant ports with holds filled with salt, timber, fish, and glass. They returned with spices, silk, furs, metals, and knowledge. Each voyage strengthened the city's economic muscles, pulling wealth into the lagoon like the tide itself. The turning point came in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. Venice did not simply support the Crusaders, it redirected them toward Constantinople. When the greatest city of the medieval world fell, Venetian ships returned home stacked with unimaginable treasures. Marble columns, mosaics, statues, relics, and the famous bronze horses that would stand atop San Marco. These trophies were not mere decoration, they were declarations. Venice was no longer a survivor. It was an inheritor of empire. As wealth flowed in, the city expanded like a living organism. Palaces rose along the Grand Canal, each one flaunting color, stone, and intricate windows. These buildings were more than homes. They were proclamations of status, carved into the very fabric of the city. But beneath the beauty lay a genius of engineering. Venice had to function, not just dazzle. The Venetians crafted a hydraulic system of astonishing sophistication. Canals were widened, narrowed, or redirected to control the flow of water and limit flooding. Entrances to the lagoon were adjusted to balance the tides. And because fresh water did not exist naturally in the lagoon, they invented a clever filtration system. Rainwater from public squares drained into underground cisterns layered with sand, emerging clean and drinkable for the entire community. Even waste disposal, primitive as it was, fit into the city's logic. Latrines emptied into canals, and twice a day the tide swept the refuse out to sea. Crude, yes, but effective. Venice was not just beautiful. It was a machine complex, deliberate, and alive. Every canal, every courtyard, every stone served a purpose. And for centuries, that purpose was power. For all its brilliance, Venice was never safe. Its greatest enemy waited beneath its foundations, rising and falling twice a day. Water was the city's shield, but it was also its executioner, patient and relentless. And sometimes, it struck without warning. On the 14th of July 1902, the Campanile of San Marco, the proud sentinel of the city, suddenly gave way. With a groan like breaking bone, the entire tower collapsed into a mountain of dust and rubble. Miraculously, no one died, but Venice stood stunned. Losing the Campanile felt like losing a piece of itself. Yet the response revealed the city's true spirit. The Venetians rebuilt it stone by stone, exactly as it had been, as if defying time itself. But the greatest threat arrived decades later. On the 4th of November 1966, the sea rose to nearly 2 meters above normal. Water surged into shops, homes, churches, and across the very stones of San Marco. Gondolas drifted where people once walked. Salt water bit into ancient mosaics. It was the worst flood in the city's memory, and it made one truth painfully clear. Venice could not rely on luck any longer. Thus began MoZ, a massive system of mobile steel barriers designed to rise from the seafloor and block incoming tides. It was engineering on a scale the old Venetians could only dream of. First tested in 2020, the barriers now lift whenever danger approaches, holding the sea at bay. Even so, Venice remains fragile. The ground sinks, the water rises, but each sunset paints the domes gold, and each tide whispers the same story. A city born from fear, shaped by ingenuity, and sustained by sheer defiance, still refuses to disappear.